All right, well, thank you for inviting me to come and chat with you guys all today. So as David said, I'm Raff Donelson. I am a professor at Dickinson Law School. I'm also a commissioner on the Carlisle Borough Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I sit on the board of directors of Mid-Penn Legal Services, which is a nonprofit law firm that offers civil legal services to low-income people across central PA. But I'm not here really to talk about myself, but I'll begin with telling the story of a client I had when I was still just a student in law school working in a legal clinic. I can tell you his story because there's been some media coverage about him. So his story begins in 1991. His name was Lindsay Criddle. Lindsay was a poor black kid from Chicago. He lived in a broken home with his mother, who had a drug problem and a short temper. She also had a long list of boyfriends who had a whole host of problems of their own. And some of those problems landed those guys in federal prison. So Lindsay wasn't really much for school. He actually spent a lot of his time when he's 16 and 17 involved in kind of minor property crimes, shoplifting, and the occasional robbery. On one occasion, Lindsay got arrested for shoplifting. And Lindsay thought that he might talk his way out of this conviction, or at least talk his way out of getting a charge. So when he's arrested and talking to the police about the shoplifting, he decides to tell them about something that had happened just a couple of weeks prior. He was the getaway driver for a robbery gone wrong. He was sitting in the car waiting for this older person he was working with, an adult, who was supposed to just rob a small business and come out. But instead, that guy shot two other people and killed them. Lindsay didn't know that anyone was going to be killed beforehand, didn't intend for that to happen, but it did happen. And he thought if he shared this with the police, they might be lenient about the shoplifting. Now, Lindsay didn't recognize that shoplifting is a really minor offense. He probably, since it was his first time being arrested, probably wouldn't have served a day in jail at all. But instead, he had admitted to a very, very serious crime. Because if you are out committing a felony, like robbery, and two people are killed as a result of that, that's a felony murder. And under Illinois law, if you commit two felony murders, you have a mandatory life sentence. So to escape a couple of days, perhaps, waiting in jail, he got a mandatory life sentence. That was in 1991. So I took on his case in 2014. Now, what were we doing in 2014? Well, in the intervening decades, the Supreme Court said that juveniles can't get mandatory life sentences. They can get life sentences, but not mandatory life sentences. Instead, the court has to look at whether this juvenile who did this is really among the worst of the worst, whether they really are incapable of reform. So everyone who had gotten a mandatory sentence would have to be resentenced. And so this is when I began working on his case, looking for information about the original circumstances of the crime, looking for mitigating information to present to a judge and hope to get something less than life without parole, or LWOP. I'm very proud to say that Lindsay was released in June of 2016 after serving 25 years. Now, to me, Lindsay's case highlights three problems that we have in our criminal justice system. One is a kind of background inequality. People like Lindsay more often than others end up turning to a life of crime. They have these bad situations like he did, growing up with disadvantage, maybe problems at home. The second thing is a kind of knowledge problem. Obviously, if Lindsay knew how to exercise his constitutional rights properly, he would have sought an attorney, and any attorney worth his salt would have learned and would have told him, this is not a thing that you should confess to police to get out of shoplifting. The third thing, and this is the thing that we're mostly talking about here today, is a kind of over-punishment problem. Now, mind you, as I said, Lindsay had some conditions in his life that predisposed him towards committing crime, and Lindsay obviously didn't know how to exercise his constitutional rights properly, and that's what landed him in jail. But we have to remember he did do something wrong, did something seriously wrong, in that robbing people, especially small business owners trying to get by, isn't a great thing. Even if most small business owners have a kind of insurance, and so they're going to be taken care of if money is taken, having somebody pull a gun on you is never a pleasant thing. It's terrifying, in fact. I've had it happen to me. So, what he did was wrong, but did he deserve the possibility of life in prison? His over-punishment. Now, the courts jumped in and rescued my client, gave him his life back, which is amazing, but the courts aren't going to be available to rescue everyone. So we have to address those three problems. On the background and equality thing, there's a lot to say here, and this isn't the time to talk about all those things. But one thing that jumps out to me is that 70% of the people convicted of felony murders in Pennsylvania are black. 12% of our population is black. Now, this kind of shocking disparity, I think, is explained by the fact that many black youths are in a similar situation to Lindsay. That they're poor, they come from abusive households, they have few options for getting ahead. And so they might turn to theft or might turn to the drug trade, and then something goes wrong. We need to make sure that we create a world where there are less Lindsay Criddles. Second thing is the knowledge problem that I mentioned. We have to work on that too. When I lived in Chicago, when I was in law school, I did know your rights trainings to tell youth in schools. Sometimes we went to churches, we went to other places where youth were, and we tried to make sure that youth did know about their constitutional rights in their interactions, particularly with police officers. I think that more things like that have to happen. I don't know if there are organizations that are doing that here in Carlisle, but we need to have them. But the last thing is that over-punishment problem that we have to fix. And this is where an organization like Straight Ahead really does come in. The scope of the problem is that over 5,400 people are serving LWOP, or life without parole sentences, here in PA. And about 500 of those people have been serving those sentences since they were juveniles. That's the problem. And what do we need to do about it? Well, one of the things that we should do is pressure our governor to grant clemency to our elders behind bars. I pulled up some research by a research team led by a Pittsburgh professor. He's at Carnegie Mellon University. And he tells us, like so many others have told, that people largely age out of crime. His research shows us that people who do property crimes, like burglary, car theft, they tend to stop doing that in their 20s. Whereas people who commit more violent crimes, they tend to stop doing those things in their early 30s, and that those involved in kind of drug crimes tend to continue a little bit longer, still into their 30s, but people typically don't commit a lot of crimes in their 40s and 50s and 60s and beyond, which tells us that we don't need to lock up people for decades and decades and decades, at least not for our safety. In addition to kind of calling on the governor to do things, as David mentioned, we can call on our legislature as well to pass reasonable legislation to eliminate those sentences that have no parole at all. Pennsylvania is just one of 6 states that has no option of life with parole. one of just 6 states. That's a terrible way for our state to stand out. If we should win the fight against LWOP, or life without parole, we have to make sure that it's a full victory. We have to ensure that there's opportunities for people to have an effective and supportive reentry. That means, there's things like the Cumberland County Adult Reentry Program. We as citizens should volunteer for that. If we're small business owners, we need to hire people who have criminal records. If we're landlords, we need to rent to people who have criminal records. And there's probably many, many other things that we have to do that I haven't thought of yet. And that's why it's important for us to partner, to put our heads together. So I want to close then in inviting you, if you can and you have ideas, to reach out to me, particularly in my role on the Carlisle Borough Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you have suggestions about how we can together speak truth to power and bring greater reconciliation to our communities, please reach out. Thank you.